Hey guys, how you going? My name is VaulSC. Last weekend I was playing infiNity in an ITS tournament event called Bio-Heist, which was in New Zealand in the town of Hamilton, which is about an hour and a half south of where I live in Auckland. So I drove down and drove back both Saturday and Sunday for a 5-round tournament, and it was really good event. We weren't expecting a huge number of people, but we still got 16 people, which was pretty big by our standards, especially since it was in a town outside of our normal Wellington or Auckland, where most of our other tournaments are held. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about my tournament prep. So this video will include a discussion of the 5 missions that we played. This was done with a variant Spec Ops. So everybody was allowed to spend 12 experience points on a Spec Ops trooper to put into their lists. So I'll briefly discuss the theory of Spec Ops, how you might apply it to your games. And then I'll move into my lists. I was playing my Shasvastii, second, third, tournament with them, but I think this is the first event with the brand new Shasvastii. No, it's not actually. It's the second event. I had Intelcom earlier this year as my first Shasvastii tournament, but this one's a bit different because I have been thinking a lot about Shasvastii and obviously evolving my understanding of them, but also this is with the brand new Wildfire miniatures as well, so that was the other motivator to run them. Then I'll briefly talk about the participants of the event and just a bit of an overview, and that will conclude this video. But in the coming week, I'm going to post bat reps of all 5 of the games that I played. Some of them were quite exciting and dramatic games, others not so much, but I'll go through all 5 of them anyway, and you'll get to see how I did with Shasvastii at this Bio-Heist ITS event. So first of all, just going to quickly show you guys my models if you haven't already seen them. I'm just going to minimize this down here. So really put a lot of effort into these models. These are with the Taugak bases, so officially the Morat style bases, but I thought they looked really cool. My new Combined Army style, I'm actually repainting my Combined Army for the 3rd time. So I started out like in 2015 with a really garish sort of purple and white grey look, stripped over that and went for a very dark green look, and now I'm still not even happy with that, so I'm replacing most of the armor panels with a color called Dark Reaper, which is a bluish gray, and the flesh and the bases are the magenta pink you can see here. So very similar to the official Corvus Belli color scheme, which is one of the only few workable color schemes for Combined Army, but it's a variant of it. As you can see here, my mentor, his face mask is painted the same colors as his skin. He's looking very organic and Cthulhu-like. We've got Shishkin, which is a conversion, as you can see here, from the Guilo. So I've repositioned his HMG arm. I've ripped off the side, so the pole arm from the old Shasvastii, cut it about hand's length. That's where her hand normally goes. And I've just tacked a little bit of a little cube onto the end of it, so it looks like a short sword. And of course lopped off the back of her head where her big organic ponytail is, stuck that in the back of the Guilo's head. And I've got this little acrylic cutout, this little plastic cutout to represent the nanoscreen on the back of the base, and I've just painted everything up. So really happy with this miniature. It looks kind of weird and funky, but it pays homage to the old classic Shishkin model that everybody knows so well. So I quite like how that turned out. This Cadmus, I think more work needs to be done on the detail of his face, but everything else pretty cool. Not a huge fan of the sculpt, but it does the job. Haven't yet played the Cadmus yet, and he's not showing up in this tournament, but I'm keen to try him at some stage. The Caliban, obviously the star of Operation Wildfire, really beautiful miniature. I feel like I could have been a bit more careful with the highlighting and shading, but I could always come back to him and touch him up a bit more. This guy goes into so many Shasvastii lists, it's not funny. And then, of course, the Nox Troopers. My camera not really doing the models justice, but really enjoyed painting these guys up. Very detailed. And I'm glad that Corvus Belli took as long as they did designing these miniatures, because the result they came up with not making them to look too weird and insect-like and stupid, but on the other hand, not making them look too robotic in Combined Army. They definitely have that symbiotic sort of biomechanical flesh plus armor plates going. But at the same time, they're still stylistically different from the Unidrons, which I really appreciate. My Shrouded Hacker, of course. Really love the Shrouded model, and the Shrouded is such a useful unit. It has so many different profiles: the Dazer Mine Layer, the Killer Hacker, the Assault Hacker, the Basic Forward Observer. So it's just a pleasure to have a really good Shrouded model to use every game. So that's how my models looked like. Let's next up talk about Spec Ops. So we'll have a bit of a discussion of that. Spec Ops is basically where you go into Army 6 and you've got this little button here next to New Group where you just highlight Spec Ops and click it, and it brings up this interface. And what you can do is you can adjust the stats of your model. So if you want to make it a close combat specialist, you can take it all the way up to 24, for example, or really high ballistic skill. You can have a BS-14 guy and give him a gun as well. And this is linkable in any sectorial as well. So what you can do is have a very high-powered specialized gun unit in your link team. Another strategy that is very popular with Spec Ops is to simply choose a skill or a piece of equipment that's not normally available to your faction. So maybe Pan-Oceania grabbing a jammer, for example. Jammer being one of the more common ones, especially since apparently it is gaining from the link bonuses as well. So you pop that bad boy in there, and you could even combine it with Hollow Echo so your opponent doesn't see it coming, or Veterans, so an enemy jammer can't jammer you back, or whatever you may want to add it to, Mine Layer just for extra defense and so forth. A very popular combination is the Doctor plus Engineer plus Hacker, and that's a really special one because you can also go +1 Whip, and so Whip 14, Doctor, Engineer, Hacker, add a couple of PAL bots to it as well. And this one's really, really popular because it saves you from having to spend the points on other doctors, engineers, and hackers in your army, which may otherwise just be points bloat, so it saves you a ton there. Very, very popular setup, and I was running that in one of my lists as well. Coming back to the other strategy, though, of just grabbing a weapon, it's going to vary from faction to faction as to what you can take. And if you just put the weapon on a line infantry trooper, you may be saving 1 SWC or 1.5 or even 2 in the cases of certain troops. But not every faction is equal in this. I mean, you've got a Nox trooper in this faction, but if you go to Caledonia or whatever it may be, the base trooper may be not as good. But when you go over to OSS and LF, you get a Diva. And the Diva is allowed to have a Feuerbark plus ODD, which is a step better than what other factions can take. And I think that of all the Spec Ops possible, that is the optimal one. The guy who won Interplanetario was running that, which I wasn't surprised. I was briefly considering doing that for this event myself. But I just painted up my Operation Wildfire Shasvastii, and Shasvastii are one of my favorite factions ever, so of course I had to run them. But when I talk about my list in a moment, I'll discuss my strategy for what I chose. My choices were one guy with an HMG and a MSV1. That was in one of my lists. So we have to take his willpower down, otherwise it doesn't make sense. And then, of course, the Doctor, Engineer, Hacker, and +1 Whip in the other list. There's a few other interesting things that I considered. You can take a holo projector and just try and put something in there that your opponent really isn't expecting. One combination I thought of was holo projector level 1 plus Mine Layer, so that there's a camo marker next to your Spec Ops, but he is not shown to have the Mine Layer ability. And my opponent might have thought that, oh crap, that's like a mentor or something else nearby, rather than a mine. But the reason why that doesn't work is that your opponent knows that you're up to something as soon as they see that you don't have a Spec Ops in your list. So they come around to your side of the table, they see there's no Spec Ops there, they wonder why you haven't taken a Spec Ops when you're allowed to, because it's such a huge point saver, it's such a huge value boost to your army. Then they realize, oh, okay, it's probably holo projector level 1, therefore if it's holo projector level 1, that marker is more likely to be a mine, and so forth. So by deduction, it's quite easy to figure out. Another way I thought of doing it was to use the holo projector to pretend to be a different kind of Spec Ops. So what I was thinking of doing is holo projectoring as just some guy with an HMG or whatever it might be, but then take a monofilament weapon like this and take martial arts level 3, which makes him a close combat boss. And then, where is it? Martial arts level 3. I'm not even seeing it here. Oh, it's at the top. And then just boost your close combat stat as high as you could possibly go to within the 12 points. So that'd be CC 19. So I briefly thought about this as well, because this guy comes along with a link team, and if your opponent thinks that you're just moving into close combat to tie them up for some reason, they may try attack you back, and then suddenly you've got this huge super combo, and they're not expecting to lose their tag or heavy infantry model or whatever it may be. So that can be quite powerful, but again, it's so situational. You need a vehicle really to get your trooper across the side of the board, and to get it into close combat in the first place is hard when you don't really have a lot of smoke options outside of the specular killer. And if you've got a specular killer, it's usually doing the job that this model's supposed to do anyway. So there are a lot of fanciful options. I looked through and I saw plasma guns, I saw, pulsar, all these really fun choices, but sadly the best loadouts are usually the most boring. What you're essentially wanting to do with your Spec Ops strategy is to either save the most points you possibly can, or create the biggest beast you can within a link team, which is usually going to be a point saver anyway. Note that you're not paying any SWCs whatsoever, so if you go the way of heavy weapon, that might be a way of getting a guy who's Bliss skill 13 into your list with an HMG in a link team of five people, where that would normally cost 1.5 SWCs or 2, or whatever the case may be, or a multi-sniper, whatever it might entail. So that can be really, really strong. But yeah, I guess most popular choice is just Engineered Dr. Hacker, specifically because otherwise, for a 15-point model, you're otherwise having to spend closer to 45 points plus an SWC for all of those troopers plus abilities, when you could get away with just buying this guy and get some cheerleaders and doing the same thing. So that's a bit of an overview of Spec Ops. There's more to it than that, but that was generally as far as I got with the thinking going into this tournament. Next thing I want to discuss is the missions. So going into the pack here, we were playing with Game 1 was Safe Area, Game 2 was Countermeasures, first go at Countermeasures for me. Game 3 was Power Pack, Game 4 was Decapitation, and Game 5 is Capture and Protect. So let's go through them. Safe Area, page 34. All of these missions, in my view, are bad, and sadly, as you guys probably remember from my very toxic and negative review of this ITS season, they've taken out the last few good missions and just kept in the really trash missions. And the overall sort of overriding viewpoint for me is that infiNity is a game with a lot of variance. There's a lot of dice rolls and random variables which swing the game in left and right. And it means that, sadly, performing the best, having the best ideas, being the best player is not enough to win a lot of the time, just because of that, the huge swing that luck can bring, that variances are going to be showing up. So you wouldn't want your missions to extend that even further and make it even swingier and even more about the dice roll for first turn, or what faction matchup you've got, or what cards get dealt in terms of classifieds, that kind of thing, or whether this table is really good for hiding your HVT, or this table's not, that kind of thing. So it's better when missions have a few different ways to win and encourage a lot of back and forth between players, and of course doable by all of the factions equally, that it doesn't advantage factions that have jammers or exceptional amounts of hacking or whatever it may be. So with that in mind, coming through to Safe Area is one where you basically wait to the end of the game and dominate more sections than your opponent. You get 4 points, which is the big swing. Of course, the sections look like these quadrants in the middle. And yes, it is possible to gain objective points from controlling the consoles, but it's very hard to get several of them at once, especially with Intelcom. And there is only one classified. You can have your liaison officer in a dominated section for one, but let's face it, if you're not going to be the player who has the most sections at the end of the game, you're going to lose. Really, the tiebreakers are more about situations where at the end of the game you've got 2 sections each, and then it comes down to the other stuff. To make things worse, the Intelcom support and control interference can also add the value of a classified card to the zone where you're at, which makes it even more luck-based in terms of the card that gets drawn at the start of the game, which I really hate. One saving grace of this mission is that you've got an entire length of the game to trash your opponent and destroy as much stuff as they can, and if you succeed in doing that, it can be an easy mission to win going first. But I feel like this mission encourages reactive play and passive play, and it's great for factions which have a lot of camo state, and of course it's good for jammers as well. And playing Shasvastii, I felt like I'd be able to do this mission sufficiently with a lot of hidden deployment stuff, a lot of defensive stuff like dazes, and this would be the mission where I'd probably play the Sphinx. Sphinx being a massive point swing, very, very quick, can move into your enemy zone even while it's in a marker state and capture it. So when I discuss my lists, I'll be discussing that as well. Also, Shasvastii, troops possessing the Shasvastii skill that are inside of a zone can operations count while they're in spawn embryo state or any other null state. So Shasvastii are getting an inherent bonus to this mission that other factions can't have, which is kind of lame. Your guy dies, goes unconscious, it's still counting as a scoring, which I feel is a bit unfair in favor of Shasvastii. So not the best mission, I'm afraid. It's also, the other reason why that mission can be a really painful one is that a lot of tournament games get cut short before both players have had 3 turns, which can mean that the arbitrary sort of time loss can really punish somebody who had a long game plan and felt like they get to play all their turns, but because the other player was slower, they got shortchanged and denied that. Moving on though, countermeasures. My first go at countermeasures, that's on page 17. So this mission is the new custom one, and I feel that it's a mission that can yield some really interesting, exciting, and enjoyable games because there's this back and forward between going for the easy objectives versus the hard ones, deciding whether to try and achieve this particular objective during a turn or discarding it and bringing another one in because you think your opponents are more likely to achieve it. So there's that back and forward, and if you end up with the same number of cards as your opponent that are captured at the end, the data tracker scoring can make the difference. But the reason why, again, I don't particularly like this mission and really sort of disagree with it, is that in order to have those wonderful games where everything's going well and the cards are interesting and create these wonderful sort of back and forward strategic and tactical experiences, there's a cost to pay. There's a price for that. And the price for that is there's going to be a certain percentage of games where one player starts their turn needing to be able to complete some of the objectives, but they're all very difficult, goes to discard the most difficult one, gets added in another one which is still quite difficult to complete, and for some reason they can't do anything that turn or maybe only get one objective, and then when it's the opponent's turn, they flip a card over and it's a really easy one to do, so they do that straight away, flip a card over, they get another really easy one to do, and they get straight away, whereas that just wouldn't have been the case if the luck was a bit more even, the variance was a bit more even in terms of random card draw. So because that's going to happen a certain percentage of the time, having this mission in the pack means that you're not always going to have a good time with this mission, and you could have easily designed a mission where generally it's going to be more about the dice rolls in the game and the player experience and decision making and strategy in the lists they're taking, rather than that amount of variance which doesn't need to be in there. And that's my argument. I've always hated classifieds, to be honest. Again, I mean, you're going to have some really fun, good games on countermeasures. I'm not denying it. It's going to be a good mission a solid percentage of the time. But, why don't you have a mission like Frostbite in there, for example, where it's not going to be about, variance and luck as to whether one side is advantaged or not. That is the main thought and takeaway there. The next mission, Power Pack, we're also playing that. So let's briefly go into Power Pack number 30. Power Pack is definitely a strong mission for taking second turn, because what you can do is you can look at whether your opponent is controlling the console closest to you, this one here, so the console, and just shoot him because he's basically right near to your side of the table. So it's very easy to stop your opponent from achieving that if they've gone first. If they've gone for the 3 transmission antennas in the middle, well, for some reason you're not allowed to get 3 of them at once, so they've only captured 2 of them, and by retaking just one of them, you've already turned it into a draw, pretty much. And then you can either capture the other transmission antenna and win, or just go after their console at that point. So being the player with second turn gives you the opportunity to, and the luxury of choosing which way to win, and just selecting the easiest way. And your opponent has to spread their resources and their positioning and their models very thin, in terms of where they need to be to stop you from doing one or the other. If they protect the consoles too heavily, you go after the transmission antennas, but if they protected the transmission antennas too carefully, you just go and grab the console. To make matters worse, If you're the player going first for some reason, you're going to be trying to gain momentum, trying to crush your opponent, shoot them down, and stop them from having the capability of moving out and grabbing those objectives. But there's a freaking saturation zone right through the middle of the table, meaning as you're moving out and trying to kill them, anything they're defending with is suddenly really a lot more effective. Any intruder, sniper, or Noctifer missile launcher, or God forbid, hack tower, Swiss guard, any tag and cover, think of an avatar, you know, your -1 burst to shoot at it, doesn't matter if you've got smoke plus MSV2, stuff's bouncing off armor and you've only got several dice. So I think this is a really poorly designed mission, but what would make it better is perhaps removing the saturation zone and perhaps changing the cost, so the amount of objective points yielded by the main objectives, and putting a little bit else in there, maybe having a little bit to do with army kills, things like that, and just spreading it out a bit more. So this is a real mission. I really prefer to go second on this one unless I've got some really specific strategy like playing my avatar and getting my speculo into their side of the table. Note that the deployment rectangles are really, really weird, so sometimes you get the wrong table with this mission and it just really screws you over. It's also quite a good mission for infiltrators, because there's no exclusion zone, and at least the infiltrators can get outside of the rectangular area and move into the center of your opponent's side of the table where they don't have any troopers. So that can be a fun one. So Power Pack was one of the missions played in the weekend. Next was Decapitation, which, to be fair, has improved. It's a better mission than it used to be, because in the old pack they translated the Spanish version wrong, and the English version had it so that you got a full 5 points just for killing the enemy designated target with your data tracker. And what you could then do is synchronize civilian with your HVT, drag it away to safety, and your opponent just couldn't win at that point, which meant that taking first turn was really the only thing that it was about. So that sucked. Where's Decapitation? I'm trying to look for it through the thing. So it has improved a little bit. The thing is, if you win the dice roll for first turn, you inevitably want to take first turn, no matter what. And the best strategy is to have your data tracker in a position where it can easily walk over and kill the enemy designated target. And then you still want to drag your designated target back to safety, because at that point your opponent can only draw at best unless they're killing your lieutenant. And then it's just a bit of a cagey game to see who kills the most stuff, which isn't always that fun. What I would change about this mission is that I would make the deployment zones shorter instead of bigger. So I'd drop it down to an 8-inch deployment zone instead of 16 inches. That way you have to defend a bit more tightly at the back, but your HVT can be set up in a space which is much closer to your side of the table, and you can still use forward deployment and infiltrators and things like that, but your list design can actually potentially protect from that data tracker from coming out there, because at the current point in time you have to put your HVT over 20 inches away from your table edge, because it's deployment zone plus 4 inches and then outside of that, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Concilium Watch is a factor in this one. You can gain an extra point from that, but really it's mostly going to be about killing more army points than them. And if you're the player going second and you lose on army points and they've killed your data tracker and saved their designated target, if they've killed your designated target but saved theirs, it's going to be a massive win to them, regardless of whether you get a Concilium Watch. So, not my favorite one, but ironically, it's actually one of the better missions for this particular tournament, just relative to the other ones, not inherently in and of itself. And the final mission, Capture and Protect. This one is okay. I mean, you can go to the end of the game and really make a game of it if you've really won on attrition. But the real problem with this mission is it's just so good for jammers, which are already very, very good. So what you have to try and think about doing to avoid being jammed as you're moving in to grab their beacon is to either have Veteran, and not every faction has access to that, or smoke grenades or eclipse grenades and move in there with stealth. But not every faction has access to that. So it's the kind of mission that helps other factions more than others. Still, it's a real mission. My strategy for it really is to usually go second if I can, but try and just wear the enemy down and don't even go for the beacon until it's the last game round. And the thinking there is that your opponent can go over and shoot the model that's holding it, And if you're spending too much effort grabbing it before the game is finished, you're not really winning on attrition. So the better way is to soften up your opponent first, make it so they can't really attack back, grab your beacon, or shoot the guy who's holding their beacon, and then in the last turn of the game, move over there and grab it, and hopefully win. And again, if you're going second, you move over there and grab it without moving it, they can't then shoot you. Whereas if it's your final turn and they've got a turn after that, and you move over there and grab it and maybe get isolated, they just have to move around the corner and shoot you, and you've dropped the beacon. So not really a good mission, but it's playable and it can result in some decent games. But you should be thinking about the veteran ability, avoiding jammers, taking your own jammers if you can, things like smoke grenades, eclipse smoke, that kind of thing, marker state, to go over there and grab that beacon at the end of the day. Cool. Let's now turn to my army lists for this one. Shasvastii. So for a while leading up to this event, where I was making a lot of lists and preparing them and things like that, I seriously considered running a Shishkin list which had limit insertion, so 10 guys in it. And what I would do is I'd write these lists which had Shishkin plus a couple of Nox troopers, including the Spec Ops, and it would have a couple of Noctifers, a couple of Calibans, and a couple of Shroudeds, and there'd be this amazing midfield presence, and I'd have heaps of marker state, and the list would feel really, really tight. After playing around with it for a number of weeks, what happened is that I looked at it and went, well, it's just a bit too heavy on midfield stuff. If the enemy moves out with like a lot of skirmishes, warband type troopers, and then using intuitive attacks, that's not going to be great. And if they have sensor, that could be painful as well, and I could be spread a little bit too thin. So what do? But as soon as I start removing a couple of those models and start putting stuff into Group 2, it ends up being quite a squishy, not very effective Group 2. And obviously, if I'm taking first turn, I'm still going to have 2 orders stripped away from Group 1, which is not great. But I ended up looking and thinking about the threads where people were taking like 8 tiger creatures, and I thought, well, there's a lot of merit in taking a whole bunch of tigers. I just don't think 8's the right number. If I go for 4 or 5 of them, they work quite well as a screen. They really help protect your link team in the middle of the table. They're very good for ripping out enemy camo markers with intuitive attacks. And of course, the 6-point trade with Berserk is very, very strong as well. Not to mention 6th Sense level 1, which incidentally I forgot about for the entire tournament, which really didn't help my case. But the list I ended up designing was this one. Shishkin's definitely in there. Shishkin's way too powerful not to take. She's still overpowered. And I don't know if Corvus-Belli are going to be fixing that anytime soon. But Shishkin and the Link team, obviously. The versions of the Tiger Creature spam lists I see don't actually have her in there. They've got Specular Killers instead. But I definitely prefer Shishkin, and I'm personally not a big fan of the Specular Killer for my own personal style. I'll take it sometimes, but usually not. Just because I like to go second a whole lot, and Specular Killers are not particularly good when you're taking second turn. They need that first turn Alpha Strike, otherwise your opponent reacts to them a little bit too well. So I was originally thinking of a 3-man link team, but I found a way to branch it out to 5 people. So we've got the Shishkin, we've got the Fort Observer Nox, nice and cheap, and he's going to be your liaison officer when that mission crops up. Tencho Expert, I feel, is a really crucial inclusion in Shasvastii lists, because it's the only thing with Veteran level 1, and if you really need to pick up that beacon in Capture and Protect, you've got at least one Veteran model which can go and grab it without being killed by a jammer, or isolated, I should say, by a jammer. Then there's the Spec Ops. You've got the Doctor, Engineer, and Hacker, which saves you the ton of points you'd otherwise spend on Dr. Worm. It allows you to link into the team, which Dr. Worm can't do, and it serves as your Hacker when you'd otherwise have to spend a bunch of points on your Hacker. So the Hacker is very useful for assisted fire and controlled jump and hack transport, all of that fun stuff. So the more of an eyebrow raiser here is the T-Drone with the missile launcher. And for a long time, I've always hated these smart missile bots, even the ones that can join link teams, because you're still only firing with burst 2 in the active turn, so it's not very reliable for attacking with. And in the reactive turn, it's still going to be a bit of a struggle if it doesn't have assisted fire up already. And with high burst, your opponent can still crush it anyway and remove it. The selling point for me is that it's kind of a cheap way of getting that additional 1.5 SWCs into the list, which I was struggling to do otherwise. Secondarily, it's kind of useful in that extreme long range where if Shishkin's trying to get the job done at beyond 32 inches, it's still a bit inefficient, even though she's got Fatality level 2. Whereas this guy can kind of crack it in 1 or 2 orders against that tag or whatever it is that's defending way in the distance, because he's, with assisted fire, he's going to be ballistical, hitting on 18s, I think it is. And then, of course, in the reactive turn at long range, it's better than Shishkin is if it's firing at that extreme distance, even though she's got Fatality level 2, because she's only going to be throwing 2 dice and it's less likely to kick in with the crits. So, for those reasons, I loved him, but the final selling point that really got this guy across the line and into my list is the fact that he's for some reason, he's got a flash pulse in there as well. So if they come along inside of his range band of 24, it starts using the flash pulse again at willpower 13, and I believe it gets the link bonuses from the flash pulse. So that makes him a really, really useful little unit. And of course, he can hide at the back there behind a building as part of the link, and as you move out, he's got the 6-4 speed to be able to keep up with him. So I really like that. Noctifer, I take Noctifers all the time. Maybe I should stop taking them. People are starting to expect them a little bit too often. But just a very, very strong and useful trooper, and a good way to spend your SWCs. And good for holding the fort when you're going second. And of course, we're going to be playing Power Pack at some point, where there's a complete saturation zone through the middle of the table. So why wouldn't you want to Noctifer on at least one of your lists? The Caliban MSV1 Trooper is a bit of an eyebrow raiser for some people, and I've definitely spoken to people who don't particularly like the profile. Thing about this guy is that he's 40 points, and he also wants to be doing a lot of attacking in close combat, but the reason I really like him is that your opponent's going to be expecting Shishkin to move out and try spraying at them with BS 18 and 5 dice and critting on 1s and the target number. So they put their heads down and keep a lot of stuff tucked away. So you need to go after them. And it's kind of hard to uproot Shishkin and 5 members of a team and walk around there. You can run into all sorts of problems. Hidden deployment, hacking, mines, jammers, you name it. Whereas the Caliban starts in the middle of the table. He can move over to a point where he can start just picking away at them in little lines, little areas of the table which Shishkin wouldn't be able to get to as conveniently. Now, the Spitfire does not have shock, but that's kind of a good thing, because you're leaving corpses there, which you can then move over to and eat, and gain the power-up additional wounds. So that's really, really strong. Then, of course, if he does manage to get to a position where he can kill something in close combat, because he's so aggressive and so efficient, you find that he could even get into close combat with something that's equivalent points as him and kill it. Or set up in suppression fire in some really annoying place. Decharges for countermeasures can be good for the sabotage mission, for example. So he's really, really strong. Again, some people don't like the Spitfire or don't like spending that extra 4 points for MSV1. But I find that he's a very powerful midfield piece for that reason I mentioned, and that is that people expect Shishkin, and moving out's not always that convenient in the earlier half of the game. You spend the first turn or two with the Caliban getting work done, then you move to Shishkin in the late game is usually the way I'd play it. Shrouded Hacker, the choice for the Assault Hacker is interesting, where I feel like we may be moving from a meta where people are taking too many killer hacking devices and not getting enough use out of them. So they're giving them up a little bit, and people taking tags a little bit more often because of the new tactical awareness rule on tags. A couple of my opponents that I'm expecting to face this event tend to play factions with hackable stuff in them. So I'm feeling like this is a really good time to be playing a Shrouded Assault Hacker. So many times where it can just pop up and just hack that tag or bulleteer or whatever it may be. And if not, hey, it's just a specialist out in the midfield that can be useful. It's still going to be able to achieve those hacking classifieds like data scan or whatever it may be and countermeasures. So really happy to have it in there. Now the Mentor, another really important choice in this mission. I have to go for the Mentor rather than Shishkin Lieutenant because I want to be able to play this list in the mission Decapitation. Shishkin's going to want to be the data tracker going out there and wrecking their designated target, but I don't want it to die, otherwise I'd give up way too many objective points. So the Mentor stays at the back. It's in marker state. It can have an ambush camera marker next to it to protect it from models moving into close combat with it in some tight corners. And it's got counterintelligence, which is really, really useful if you do decide that you want to move out first turn with Shishkin, or just with your Caliban, 9 orders worth on him, and getting a lot of work done. So I think that's a really important choice. Drone fits snugly in there for being a cheerleader, plus the 2 Echidrons, and then there's the 5 Tiger creatures. All of them have the upgrade for the double action close combat weapon. I think that's a really important consideration, really, that if you've only got that one shot to move there and berserk them, if you fail the crit and they pass the armor save against your physical 13, well, you've missed out on a really awesome opportunity to kill like a TO camo infiltrator or whatever it might be out in the midfield. But they're much less likely to survive against that double action close combat weapon. So spending that one extra point for it, I think, is a really, really big deal. Tiger creatures, extremely fast, berserk, very useful. Hyperdynamics means that if they bait out a hidden deployment shot or a major Luna firing at them and coming out of camo, you're dodging on a 16, which makes a big difference, allowing you to keep that model alive, shoot whatever shot at it, clear it out, and then move out with the tiger creatures again. So with all 5 of them, they're deploying in spots where they can rush forward impetuously. If your opponent is shooting back at you with AROs, that only means that they're a sitting duck if Shishkin stands up and blasts them after the Impetuous have moved out, or the Caliban goes hunting them from the middle of the table where it can easily close the distance and get to within that 24-inch range band. So that's the extreme strength of this Tiger strategy, is that if your opponent's just hiding there in total cover for the fear of Shishkin or whatever it may be, the Tigers just run across the battlefield and they can cover a distance of 24 inches just with their Impetuous and their Irregular Order. And then as you can see, I've just tucked in a couple of Echidrons there so that if you've got one Tiger creature almost to their deployment zone with just their Irregular and Impetuous, you can just jump over the finish line and berserk something or chain colt something with one of your group 2 regular orders. And obviously, you can use command tokens to convert your other Tigers orders into regular orders so that you can, if you're having a really amazingly lucky run with one Tiger creature, you can keep bashing face with it at the end. So they're extremely strong offensively and defensively, and I find that this particular list is one of the strongest Shasvastii lists that I can come up with at the moment. And it's definitely, now that I think about it, a much stronger list than just running a 10-man limited insertion Shishkin list, which may struggle to go and chase enemies down that are hiding away in your active turn, or defend against enemies that are trying to swarm you when it's their active turn. You kind of get the best of both worlds with this kind of balanced setup, which I really, really like, and it's appropriate for so many of these missions. Power Pack, excellent. Decapitation, Shishkin, Data Tracker, Mentor Lieutenant, really liking that. And the Tiger creatures can trade well for more expensive stuff. Power Pack, you've got the Noctifer there behind the saturation zone. If your opponent really is going to be going second, you basically uproot Shishkin in your last turn, move over there, pummel as much stuff as you can, camp on their console, and hopefully have the middle objectives already captured by the Shrouded Hacker, and just hope they've got too few models left. Countermeasures, again, you've got stuff that can complete just about everything. You've got the Spec Ops, which you have to use quite diligently with all of its specialist abilities. But with Shishkin having decharges as well as the Caliban, that's very useful. And Shishkin can obviously score because being a character, she counts as like an elite unit or something like that. And then Capture and Protect, we've got the Tencho Trooper in there, just so that Shishkin can babysit him all the way over there, and if there is a jammer at the end of the day, the Tencho is the model that picks up the beacon and hands it over to Shishkin as the data tracker, or whoever else it may be. So I'm feeling really good about going into most of the missions with this list. We'll then talk about my secondary list over here, where I'm running the Sphinx. I really felt like the best pairing for Shishkin would be just a completely different list, which might have the jump on certain matchups and certain missions, but at the end of the day, this really is probably a one-use list for the mission safe area. With Shishkin, the problem can sometimes be that by the end of the game, all of your Tiger creatures are dead, your Link team is a little bit sort of out of position, you need to try and spread yourself between 4 zones, and to get over there, it might be a bit of a hassle, and your opponent might have set up some AROs. Whereas the Sphinx can stay in hidden deployment until your first turn, then you can move out, shoot a few things, and move back. You've got tactical awareness, so it's 11 orders of Sphinxing, and you go back in a marker state at the end. If your opponent's coming to you, they've got to go through this Dazer, which is already on the ground thanks to the Shrouded Mine Layer, already having a Dazer out there. They've got to move through 2 Noctifers. If they have to shoot at the Noctifers, they are -1 burst, regardless of which Noctifer they're shooting at. If they're moving in with something that's hackable, you've got the Shrouded Hacker out there as well, which is also very resistant to being attacked because of marker state. And all of these things like the Noctifers and the Shroudeds, if they want to, they can go into unconscious. If they've already moved into the zone, then they still count their points towards that zone, which is very, very useful. Medtech, of course, Journalist level 1 now, so that's kind of handy. Echidron with its baggage, able to move the plus 20 points of baggage into the zone. This list very, very good for coordinated orders. Then there's the little mini link team. So you got the Nox Lieutenant, Tenjo FTO, just in case for some reason you want to run this in Capture and Protect. And then there's my Spec Ops. And for this one, because I'm already taking Dr. Worm and I don't need a hacker, I've already got an Assault Hacker there, I am running the HMG and the MSV1. And the reason why is that sometimes that Sphinx isn't really going to be able to come out of cover and fire at that thing in the distance because of the range band. Whereas if you've got the Nox Trooper throwing 5 dice at something, that might be the way to go. Like, imagine the Sphinx trying to deal with a Kamau sniper and a link team. That can be kind of annoying, whereas the Nox maybe has a bit of a better go at it. Because even though you're on Bliss Skill 11, you've got 5 dice and you're ignoring his mimetism. So he's shooting back with 2 dice on 16s versus your 5 dice on 11s. If your guy dies, he was just one 15-point Spec Ops guy, and you can then move on to trying it with the Sphinx. Or if the Nox doesn't completely die, you can revive him with the Medtech and have another go at it. And later in the game, if for some reason you've lost your Sphinx and it's been a bit of a trade and there's very few models left either side, that little mini link team moving out to try and control some area or grab the beacon or whatever it may be has the additional oomph of that HMG with MSV1 to pick off their flash pulse bots with mimetism, easily killed by this HMG. And it's just very handy for moving around the table. And of course, although you've spent all your SWCs on other stuff, this guy doesn't actually cost any SWCs despite his gear, which I find really, really useful. So a pretty cool list. I feel like it's overshadowed by my other list, which is stronger, but definitely keen to play the Sphinx in at least one game. Otherwise, it's just going to be heavy lifting with Shishkin and a really sort of well-tailored Shasvastii list. I would recommend borrowing this list, by the way, guys, and giving it a go. The only thing is that in your games, you may not be allowed to take a Spec Ops, so you may actually have to drop something out of this list and upgrade your Nox Trooper to a Dr. Worm or something like that. You may have to sort of drop things out a little bit, maybe drop the Mentor, turn the Spec Ops into the Lieutenant, and have the Mentor as the Dr. Worm, for example, would be another way of just patching this list out. Cool, so we've talked about my Shasvastii, we've talked about the missions, we've talked about Spec Ops, we've talked about my lists. I will just round this video out by talking briefly about some of my opponents who showed up to play this most recent weekend. So we had our buddy Ollie, who is the man behind the company Battle Kiwi. He's recently designed this army display area, which you can buy on his website. It also comes with the little bases, so you put your army on the MDF cutout bases, and they slot into the army display tray, which is really cool. He was also running Shasvastii for this weekend, although sadly I didn't run into him. I've been dodging him every single tournament for the last couple of years, and I know we're going to have to face each other eventually. He's got a similar list to me, target creatures in the back, as you can see, represented by these gremlin dudes. But also the new Wildfire Shasvastii setup as well. Our buddy Jed and Matt playing Aleph and Combined Army respectively. You might remember me facing Jed in the last couple of years with his avatar, running that yet again. Here's your boy VaulSC with my painted up Shasvastii army, which I'm really proud of. Also mixing in some of the old classic Siege soldiers as well. Keen to give that a hoon. Our buddy Garth, aka Elfs, aka Hyung, with his Yu Ching. He's been experimenting a lot with his airbrush, which is pretty cool, but only these few models are painted so far. Kiwi Steve with his O12 hasn't really painted many of them up yet, but he's also very active on the Astro Blues campaign with his O12 as well. Excuse me. So we've got Matt with his O12, who I did get to play against. He hasn't painted up many of his troopers, but they're coming along. He's going for this red-black theme with his O12. You can see Rama Task Force, I think it is, in the background there from Ryan. A bit more of a close-up on his models. Pano player, who I didn't get to play against. I think this was possibly one of the local players from Hamilton. Looks like he's sporting a very blue Pano army there. Looks to be pretty heavy on the military order style pieces. Our buddy Robert Provan, aka Toaster, showing up with his Invincible army. And I hadn't seen this guy for a long time. He featured on my YouTube channel in my first few months of playing infiNity, way back in 2015, when he was playing as Nomads. But you might recognize the tile set of his spaceship terrain. But I thought his Invincible army looked really, really cool. Looks like we also had a TAC player as well. Didn't get to face off against him, but I always like seeing some of these miniatures around too. The wonderfully painted Bakunin models by Jana. So she was playing her Bakunin, didn't get to face her, but always coming over to look at how wonderfully her army's painted. She did win the vote for Best Painted this weekend, and one of those votes was from me. Really loved the way that turned out. Our buddy Hexa, always the opponent of VaulSC since the beginning of time. I've played this guy more than anybody else, but he likes to bring his tray of his entire army just so you can't work out which ones he's actually got in his lists. I'd also thought I'd show you a picture of this custom-built Maghariba Guard, which is constructed by Robert, who I mentioned earlier. This was built way back in the day before the actual new sculpt for the Maghariba came out, and he's basically scratch-built this based on a picture that was there at the time of what the sculpt was going to look like. So he's like, oh, put something together with cardboard and wood and MDF and balsa wood and so forth. So great job there. It's not on the correct base size, but it looks really, really fun. So that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed this overview of my Shasvastii preparation for the event. Hopefully you'll watch the 5 bat reps I'm going to be putting out this week of how these lists actually did end up performing in these missions. 1 bat rep per day if I can manage the time, so that by the end of the week you'll see the full result. Stick around, guys. See you soon.